the idea. So I'm trying to wrestling with the idea of decoloniality and digital theology, and try to use Hong Kong as a case study of illustrating the danger of recolonisation in the digital space. So I will skip the literature review about decoloniality of digital media and of theology, but you can skim it in the paper if you want to. But I want to highlight some discussion about decolonization. So the quote here is from a Muslim liberation theologian, Shada Wahatuma. For him, decolonization discusses how power and knowledge are constantly developed from a social context. Thus, quote, decolonizing knowledge is about locating knowledge within power relations. The knowledge we have is obtained through the lived experience of the privileged center of our society, end quote. So my paper basically continues this kind of discussion of how the power dynamics playing or changing in this digital space and in dialogue with digital theology. So here I use Eric Stoddart's theology of surveillance to argue that it is of high importance to aware the online presence and absence of individuals. So just as God's omnipresence illustrates God's care to human beings, the church community as the witness of God may also have to rethink its approach to nurture both digital natives, marginalized groups in the digital space, and those who prefer offline interactions. While most of us benefited from the internet during the pandemic, such as grocery shopping, updating COVID news, and keeping in touch with colleagues and families, digital space also constrains the knowledge we receive in terms of our geographical locations, such as how Google determine what kind of information we receive. So in his monograph, The Common Gaze, Stoddarт highlights the importance of the role of shepherd in the parable of the lost sheep. He states that people often focus on the lost sheep who return to the shepherd, but they seldom ponder the role of the shepherd in the parable, especially the description in Luke 15, where the emphasis put on the latter who has lost the sheep. Building on his argument, I propose to handle ministry with sensitivity and indicate the limitations of digital devices or spaces can do for us. While most digital inhabitants are comfortable sharing their lockdown life on social media, those who are digitally poor may be indirectly marginalized online. In terms of digital poverty, I refer to the inability to choose to be online or offline. This may be due to the lack of digital devices and or digital literacy. Since the digital divide will worsen in the post-COVID world, doing pastoral ministry with a decolonial mindset will help tackle digital inequality. So regarding the church ministry, I'm using 5 months of mission introduced by the Anglican Communion, especially the 4th month, that may assist us to think of the disappearance of marginalized people online. It proposed that the church code to transform unjust structures of society and challenges violence of every kind and pursues peace and reconciliation, end quote. For those in digital poverty, the absence of a digital footprint online may decrease their exposure to social networks, as well as the access of information, and thus receive less pastoral care when necessary. Here, I'm thinking the lack of social media posts may be because they're diagnosed with social media, diagnosed with COVID, and thus cannot use social media as often. This is probably different from youth ministry in the pre-COVID world, when youth pastors hesitated to spend too much time online because online interaction has become a significant form of communication during the pandemic. When our world is heavily shaped by social media or by search engines that select the information that we receive, It is essential to remain humble on the reality that we may not obtain the truth of particular events or people. The willingness to learn more about each other's experience during COVID seems necessary when our understanding of each other is predominantly shaped by the other's presence or absence online. This understanding is also beneficial when social media portrays an ideal life for most, whenever Christians or not, although the heavy use of social media may not always positively impact one's mental health. I'm aware that I use a theory from a highly institutionalized denomination, which for some is the cause of structural racism and marginalization. However, an institution does not have to be changed if it is already in perfect condition. The recognition that our society is not perfect due to structural inequality and thus needs to be improved will also help us reflecting on our ministries. This will helpfully bridge the gap in highly institutionalized churches. Decoloniality does not necessarily mean identity politics, that one's epistemology must be replaced by others. Instead, different ideologies can coexist together based on a decolonial mindset and perhaps what they learn from their context. Here I use Hong Kong, my hometown, as case study, but I think it can apply to Burma or mainland China, where internet usage is censored by government. In reflecting on the scenario in Hong Kong, one may notice the increasing surveillance of digital space, which may jeopardize the freedom of speech. So here I use an example about a newspaper and the website I'm showing this picture about some pro-democratic movement to show that the recolonization of the governmental institutions. In these scenarios, the digital space almost become a battlefield for the Communist Party of China to determine what ideologies are or are not aligned with the party's goal. While I agree that Hong Kong is part of China, I'm concerned with a China-centric ideology, which claims China is the center of the world. For me, this is merely another form of recolonization, which should be resisted whenever we are Christian or not. The case of Hong Kong shows digital theology and the limitation of the digital space itself. When the digital space inhabits the freedom of speech and asserts colonization to internet users, it will not become a democratic space as we hope to be. While rather, it illustrates that offline interactions become a more viable option when the users, whenever the users choose to be or not. Hence, as digital theologians, we may have to discern when digital space is no longer safe for users, if they are not using VPNs or encrypted messaging services such as Signal, and how we may use a hybrid approach creatively for ministry or day-to-day interactions. I have teased out a bit in this article for how to live in truth in the recolonized digital space, which is shown in the slide. Therefore, guiding online users to share meaningful content and even the truth will be the next task for digital theologians in the post-COVID world. As we discussed before, we all have our limitations that what kind of knowledge we receive based on our geographical location and education, and thus unpacking our colonial epistemology may take time. So humbly listening to others, just as Jesus reaching out to the Samaritan woman, is of essential when information is gerrymandered online. Hopefully this will help us to reflect on the necessity of the decoloniality and the danger of recolonization in digital space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Calida. We're going to go straight into Rei's response.
Okay, so thank you so much. It's my joy to give a response to what I think is a very important paper, and hopefully to steer further reflections and questions, and maybe some recommendations as well to Calida. So I share in the conviction that decoloniality is most dangerously transformative when it is taken seriously as a sensibility, as a way of seeing, and as a restless now pursuit. So thank you, Calida, for writing a paper that concretely shows the ever-present danger of recolonization. As I was reading it and reflecting on it, it reminds me of a similar the process that was described by René Girard as mimesis, and also perhaps Homi Bhabha's concept of mimicry. I'm not sure if you will agree with me on that. But those two ways of seeing has always reminded me that there is this human tendency to always fail to free ourselves from the oppressive and harmful ways by which we relate to each other. And in so many times and in so many ways, we are not aware and not even conscious of the process by which we inflict unto others what we have experienced. It would indeed be painful to see, I agree with you, that the church, which is God's decolonizing force, if I may put it that way, it will forget its identity, loses its soul, and conforms itself unmindfully to the icons of the digitality. And maybe in the end, it will find itself perpetuating the same order of things, which neglect those at the margins and those who do not have the digital capital to participate, as you have noted. I really like how you put it in such a memorable terms by using the language of the presence and absence in digital space, and even the idea of the digital footprint. It raises to us very important questions, especially for church leaders, who is here and who is not here. And even as we speak in this now gathering, who is here and who is not here, and why as well. Of course, also mindful that digitality also affords certain ways of inclusion as well. In the context of the church, it allows a lot of people who would rather find it hard to go to physical spaces anymore, but now has find it more liberating to be more now present to the digital community that they are now a part of. For example, those with disability and those who are the elderly. And also important questions like what is being shown, right? And what remains hidden, or what is being kept hidden. And the more important question of why. And you pop the big question for digital theologians who have an ecclesiological responsibility to the body of Christ that is now virtually incarnating itself. And you ask, how can churches avoid a colonial mindset that may recolonize, albeit indirectly, the others as it moves into the digital space? I think it touched on a lot of things about the papers as well on theological seminaries and institutions that is now trying to move online. And your recommendations, I agree, is important. I think you made two very strong recommendations. One is to be cautious and to be discerning. To be cautious because digital spaces are not necessarily a neutral space. And we should be discerning when this space transforms into spaces that now constrain what is true and what is just, as you have mentioned, is happening in Hong Kong. And maybe we can even reflect on what is happening now in social media. Whereas a few years ago, it's a liberating tool to allow conversations, connect people, and now it might be the other way around. And if I may make two suggestions to just build on your desire to build a robust civil society that cannot be easily suppressed by power. I love that line. Maybe on top of the wisdom of Chin Shin Wing, which you mentioned, will it be helpful to explore as well certain tools and tactics of resistance, that big word, resistance, that may not be so calm, but maybe options of subversion. This is akin to Walter Mignolo's belief that, of course, we may not be able to decolonize spaces like the university, the government, and in our case, the digital sphere, but we practice decoloniality as we inhabit these spaces and experience the fruit of that work. But the big question is, who is we? Who is doing what? And for whom? And I think it is important, and I really believe that it's very important to do the colonial work in digital, not theology, taking with us these questions of for whom, with whom, and where, as Andrew Staubert reminded us yesterday in his paper. But if I will add another one, by whom? And that leads me to my second proposal, or maybe a question. Will it help to say a bit more on that particular section about digitality and decoloniality and theology? Will it help to say a bit more about the faces and the voices of theologies that are actually on its way to decolonizing? The ones that Shadab Rahim Tullah described as the new forms of knowing and being, from the destituted parts of society. And of course, I will add that especially those who are subverting the digital to reappropriate it, to repurpose it, maybe also to repent of it, and at the same time to redeem it. And as we enter the era of pandemics, I agree that the fifth wave of digital theology is not only important, but actually indispensable, especially those working in digital theologies who share the conviction that decoloniality is most dangerously transformative when it is taken seriously as a sensibility, as a way of seeing, and as a restless person. So I enjoyed the paper and thank you so much.